Come on. Come on. There we go. Good lad. Okay. It's all good. Hello there, friends and neighbors. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. I don't know, wherever the heck you may happen to be in this big round, yes, sorry, flat earthers, big round world of ours. I'm Tad. I'm just double checking a couple things here, but that doesn't prevent me from being Tad. Not at all. So I am here. I am going to hang out for a little while. Those of you who are going to hang out with me, welcome. Lovely to have you. I'm going to just check a few things here. What do we got? Okay, good. Excellent. Who's checked in so far? Let me say hello. Dirk and Wouter and Andre and Mr. Batnick. And Petra and Chris. Hello, Chris. And Christy Sanders and Debbie and Nikki and Mark all checking in. So lovely to see you all. And as I said, we're going to be reading more of the Witchwood Crown. We just finished Thanksgiving here in the United States, which we celebrated yesterday. A very small, intimate family get together. We were missing one member of our family who is currently in Minnesota, which is a perfectly okay place to be. I'm actually rather fond of Minnesota, but not so fond to have one member of our family off and away where we can't keep an eye on them. But anyway, hope they're doing well. They were last I talked to them. And so anyway, so we had a small intimate gathering and then found out afterward that the person that our daughter had been staying with the night before had come down with COVID. And so we're all kind of praying that we're not going to get it again. Well, Deb and I are praying. The other two, I don't think, have had it. So they're probably praying even harder. I'm guessing that Deb and I still have a few antibodies running around with not much to do at the moment. And then suddenly now they have a chance. So anyway, at the moment, feel okay. So that's that. What else? Not really much else. As I said, it was a small, intimate Thanksgiving for which I have no complaints. Whoops. And working away at the moment on the ordinary farm, third ordinary farm, and I've got some rhythm going on that now, which is very nice after a couple of months of not being able to work. At least not being able to work with my hands. I can still work in my head, thank God. This magnificent shaved dome is actually useful for something besides hanging my hat on. And when I can't work for other reasons, in terms of typing or something like that, I can always work in the brain on whatever I need to work on. So, and in fact, as I think I've said in the past, a great deal of my production takes place in here long before I ever put my fingers on the keyboard, just because I find it easier that way. So, but you've all heard me say that a dozen times, so I'm not going to bore you with that story again. Let me think. Anything else that I need to discuss? Not really. We're just kind of in that mode now. We've got a ton of birthdays at this time of the year. Two of the kids in November, Deb in December, and then of course Christmas, and then January is the oldest child. So many birthdays all back to back, and the Christmas shopping as well. And so that and moving back and trying to get some stuff done in the I keep saying old house, but it's still our house and it's going to be our house again. Getting some stuff done in the house, the old house before we move back in, and various things have kept us quite busy. Not only that, but of course, just the day-to-day crap that has to be dealt with, especially by poor Deb, who's struggling with all kinds of banking and government issues. And oh God, poor woman. And she is going at it very bravely, but it's just, I won't complain about it. It's hers to complain about. She's the one who's been putting in most of the time dealing with the bureaucracy. Not that I haven't on my own with some other things as well, but she's had the worst of it, no question. Anyway, but as of now, she is sleeping the sleep of the just, and as far as I know, everybody in the household is, except for moi, um, which is kind of the way things used to be. That was, for most of my life, the kids would get put to bed, Deb would fall asleep sometimes before the kids were put to bed, and I would be up prowling around at all hours, and that's kind of what I'm used to. And so, although I obviously love my family, I also like having time to myself to prowl around the house. So anyway, let me just check and see who else has popped in since I said hello. And I see Wouter. I don't know if I said hello to Wouter yet. Claudia. James. Hello, James. Good to see you. Christina and Petra, who I already mentioned. Ilva. Hello, darling. Good to see you. And right in the line of people who've checked in underneath Ilva is my mother-in-law, Hazel. Hello, sweetie. Good to see you. As I said just a few moments ago, your daughter is doing well, a trifle overworked on the bureaucratic front, but other than that, she seems to be in fairly good fettle. So good to see you, sweetie, and give our love to everybody. Let me see who else is on here. Kristen. Hello, Kristen. Hadn't said hello to you yet. Iris is also someone I haven't said hello to. And Mahmoud, good to see you. Dirk and Andre, yeah, I already got you guys. David, I'm not sure if I caught you the first time through. Now they're all in different order, so it's hard to tell. Anyway, so that David was David Stone, who I don't know if I've had check in for a reading before, but pleasure, as always, to welcome anybody who has either been here or not been here. And everybody is, of course, always welcome. So, I really don't have much to say. Just deep, deep, deep into the heart of the holiday season, which for me is not unlike the old Indian or Native American thing of running the gauntlet, where you have to run down the middle of two lines of people who try and brain you on the head with tomahawks or whatever. I don't remember exactly how it works, but it's not running the gauntlet, it's running the gantlet. And apparently, a gantlet is a Native American word. That's what I was told. That's what I'm going with for now. But gauntlet is actually a different word, and the two have become elided over time. But of course, a gauntlet is a glove. But anyway, so make of that what you will. Go look it up if you want to. I believe gantlet is spelled like it sounds, Gantlet. But look it up, check me out. Find out if I am just running at the mouth, which I usually am, but whether I'm running at the mouth truthfully or non-truthfully. And feel free to post the answer on the Facebook page. And yes, that's the only place I'm doing this, since Twitter, now X, made it functionally illicit to put a link to anything else, to any other service. So I used to post all these things on Twitter because I have followers on Twitter, but then they said I couldn't do that anymore. So, like, who needs you, Mr. Musk? Just because you have billions of dollars doesn't mean that you get to be the boss of me. So there. Anyway, it's sad and unfortunate because I'm sure there are people on Twitter who don't even know where I've gone, but I just couldn't put up with that crap anymore. And I'm not just talking about the link stuff, but I've tried to keep this a politics-free zone. So I will avoid telling you all the many ways in which Elon Musk is both upsetting me, irritating me, and occasionally frightening me. But those of you who are Twitter habitués will already know what I'm talking about. So no need for details. Oops, there, as you can see, behind my office chair, besides Astro Boy and Charlie Brown, whose head came off and who now you can't really see it's Charlie Brown anymore, but it is. It's the Giants, San Francisco Giants giveaway Charlie Brown. But what I was going to point out before I started reading was this lovely picture by Paul Story, unfinished, but I told him I wanted it that way because it was already so good. And it's of Fafnir, the dragon from the ring cycle, among other things, but actually originally from Norse myth and then Germanic myth as well. And it's hard to say where it came from first because the Norse and Germanic myth systems are quite intermingled and complicated in their relationship to each other, and may both have come from some earlier proto source. But anyway, I've always been very fond. Whoops! I've always been very fond of that picture. It's attempting to show the duality of both the greedy human Fafnir and the greedy dragon that he becomes, and it's just such a nice picture of the yeah, I guess I already said it, the duality of what lurks within us as compared to what we show to the outside world. Well, what lurks in some of us. I'm not saying everybody is a potential dragon. What else was I going to mention? Anyway, so Paul's work, Paul Story's work, along with the work of his wife, Rose Warnock, are great favorites of Deb's and mine. And when we fell in love with their work, we fell in love with both of them at an exhibition that we were walking around in. And we both of us, I'm just telling you this quick story. It was in London back in the early 90s, and it was a huge exhibition. It had everything from weekend painters to real masters, real extremely well-known, collected, expensive artists, the whole gamut. And it was huge. It was in a giant convention center in London, over near the Angel, as I remember. Anyway, Deb and I were walking around this because we're art people and we like art. And at times we would sort of divide up, and one of us would go off following a whim on something and the other would go off. And anyway, when we got back to together at one point, we both said, I really like that Paul Story guy, and we both, whoever said it first, the other one went, yeah, me too. And then we were sort of comparing notes, and we both had also been very taken by Rose Warnock's dreamlike landscapes. And it was only later on when we contacted the gallery that it turned out dealt with both of them or represented both of them, that they were married to each other. So Deb and I thought that was kind of a sign, an omen that, not only had we separately, both of us picked out these two different artists that we both really liked without consulting each other, but then we found out that they were married to each other. And later on, because we started collecting their work, we became friends with Paul and Rose. And in fact, I had a project for which I keep doing that. I'm still confused by where things are in this version. That it was actually a project that I was going to do with Paul, which was a combination of many different things, both the myth cycles of ancient Norse, but also a very interesting, true historical writer whose name has just at the moment slipped my mind, but a very funny, strange German writer, Christian. God, I've gone blank on his last name. I'm sure some of the German watchers, folks out there in the viewing audience, will know who I was talking about. But anyway. And it had many other kind of aspects to it. And then for various reasons, having nothing to do with Paul whatsoever and having much more to do with me and the complication of my writing life at that point, it never got done. And I'm very sad about that still. But I did get this painting from Paul unfinished because I liked it that way, as a reminder of all the things in life that we don't get to do but would have enjoyed doing anyway. So now I have babbled and babbled for the first 14 or 15 minutes. I think it's probably time for me to start reading. So one of these days, by the way, I'm going to figure out how to get the comments on here in real time. And then people can ask me questions and stuff. Before that, I may just do one whole show where people can ask me questions or make statements or tell me to shut up, which is, a legitimate option at any time. But for now, I can see who've left comments, but if I try to get to the comments, it doesn't work very well. And I can't really there's too great a chance of messing up. So I don't want to do that. So especially because I've had some grim circumstances in the past where I've failed to make the technical aspects work properly. So I'm going to leave that alone for a while. And again, forgive me for not being able to answer questions directly. Although I hasten to say, for any of you who want an answer to something, feel free to drop a question or a statement or whatever on any of my social media pages, and I will see it and I will get to it. And if it's a question, I will answer it. If it's a statement, I will absorb it. So anyway, all right. So we are reading from the Witchwood Crown, you may remember. And at this point in the Witchwood Crown, we have just spent some time first with Nazeru, and who is a half Norn, half mortal. And now who is on a secret, very important mission that she's on behalf of Queen Utuku. And Nazeru is part of a Queen's Talon, which is a special select group of 5 highly trained, I don't know what you call them because they're not all warriors. 3 of them are. One is an echo, which is a communications person. And one of them is traditionally a singer from the Order of Song, which is the sort of wizards, warlocks, witches, the magic wielders, as it were, which they refer to as song, and so they are called singers. Anyway, but that was Nazeru. That was the daughter of Vieki, whom we are following now. And Vieki is the Norn father. Hikadaya is their name for themselves. The Norn father of Nazeru. And he has been summoned to the presence of Queen Utuku for the second time in a matter of days. She has just woken up from her 30-year deep, deep sleep that followed the loss of the battle that is detailed in To Green Angel Tower at the end of the first trilogy. And at first he is pretty certain he's being taken to be executed because, like virtually everybody in the Norn hierarchy, he knows that it doesn't matter whether you've actually done anything wrong. What matters is what Utuku wants to have happen to you. And if she doesn't like you or she's ticked off about something you've done, you're doomed. Anyway, as he has gotten closer and closer, he has discovered that there are many, many others, also other high officials of Nakiga, which is the Norn city in the mountain, who are all being summoned to Utuku, and that's where we are. And other thing, they're going deep, deep down into the tunnels and landings and levels far below the Nakiga city. So they're going down into the roots of the mountain. Despite the many nobles and guards descending together, the narrow stairwell was nearly silent, but for the feather-soft rustle of their footfalls. The smothering air seemed to grow even thicker and closer, but Vieki found as he descended that with self-control he could breathe normally, if more shallowly than usual. Vieki had never entered the sacred chamber of the well in all his long life, and as he emerged from the last stairwell into the cavern, he could not help staring around in fearful fascination. Arched galleries ringed the chamber, both at the bottom and higher up, but what drew his eye was the hole in the center of the cavern floor. A ragged gouge surrounded by a circular lip of carved inlaid stones, the mouth of the well. The radiance that oozed from it seemed like something heavier than mere light, lying close along the stony floor, while leaving the reaches above the upper galleries lost in shadow. By its dull ochre gleam, Vieki thought he could see faces gazing down from the dark openings in the walls above him, or at least things that looked like faces. The well itself blazed like the maw of one of the mountain's flaming crevices, but its thick light seemed to come from a source even older than the mountain's internal fires, a bleak, yellowish glow that might have lit the world before even the stars first began to burn, and which made everything in the great chamber seem to lean and loom. A shape hung in the column of wavering light above it, something real as blown glass, yet insubstantial as smoke, an object Viecki could not entirely understand or even completely see. This was the breathing harp, a sacred object brought to Nakiga from lost Kementari when the immortals there had fled the sudden ruination of that great city. From some angles the harp seemed near enough for Viecki to touch, but even a slight tilt of his head reduced it to vanishingly faint scratches on the air, lines that were barely there at all, but with spaces between them that seemed to open onto limitless vistas and made his eyes ache. When Viecki finally pulled his gaze away, the harp seemed to linger before him like a shadow wherever he turned. But even the well and the harp could not hold his attention for long because, like any of his people, when Viecki saw the slender silver-masked figure sitting still and pale as a statue on her great chair of black stone, he found it nearly impossible to look at anything else. "Mother of all, give strength to your servant." The sight of the queen brought old words of worship to his mind. "My life is yours. My body is yours. My spirit is yours." If this is an execution, Viecki thought then, even a wholesale destruction of the noble caste, then at least my death will be at her command. It was a strangely reassuring idea. Dying, he would at least know that order prevailed, that the mother of the people, not Akinabe, still ruled in Nakiga. The Lord of Song was present, of course, standing to one side of the queen's throne, facing the well. Its weird, pulsing light, which painted Utuku's white mourning garb with earthy yellows and strange blues, fell onto the darkness of Akinabe's hooded robes and vanished, so that the powerful singer seemed to stand in his own shadow, only his mask of dried flesh and painted runes clearly visible. More surprising to Viecki, though, was the figure on the other side of the throne. Jijibo, the dreamer, a descendant of the queen so rarely seen outside of the palace as to be almost a legend in the rest of Nakiga. Utuku and Akinabe were motionless as they watched the crowd assembling, but scrawny Jijibo was in perpetual twitching motion, his fingers convulsively flexing and his wide mouth working as he muttered unendingly to himself. Viecki knew from experience that the dreamer's words seemed to leap from his thoughts to his tongue without even the faintest consideration for propriety or courtesy or even ordinary sense. Most of Nakiga's nobles considered Jijibo helplessly mad, a rare but not unknown affliction among the people, because he wore mismatched garments and talked to himself aloud, though often incomprehensibly. But the dreamer had a talent for devices and plans that pleased his ancestor, the queen, so he was suffered to go where he wished and to do largely as he pleased. Viecki's order of builders, in particular, often had to deal with his sudden demands for this or that space or materials they had planned to use themselves. But as a relative and favorite of the mother of all, Jijibo was outshone perhaps only by mighty Lord Akinabe himself, so Viecki's order seldom had any recourse but to let the dreamer have his way. Because his vision had been blocked by so many others, it was not until Viecki reached a position in the crowd directly facing the queen's throne that he saw a group of figures already kneeling at the queen's feet as though to receive honors from their monarch. But their slumped postures and bound wrists told Viecki more than he wanted to know about the nature of the reward they expected. As the last of the Nakiga nobles crowded into place behind Viecki, the lightless ones began to sing in the unknown deeps below the chamber of the well, soft, strange cries, as alien as bitterns booming in a marsh, but also as complex as speech. Some said the lightless ones had lived in the depths even before the Hikedaya came to the mountain. Some that their ancestors had traveled from the distant garden on the 8 ships with Queen Utuku and the Kedaya. But in truth nobody could say for certain whether they were many creatures or one thing with many voices. If the queen knew the lightless one's full tale, she never spoke of it. As they all waited in near silence, Vieki could feel fear and tension growing in his fellow nobles, as though they were a single flock of birds that might suddenly startle and take wing. Clearly, most of them were as confused as he was, frightened by the unexpected summons, by the Hamaka guards who had led them here, and the squadron's worth of battle-armored Queen's Teeth guards who stood behind Utuku's throne. If we are not all to be executed, Vieki thought, then there must be grave news indeed if the Queen brings us all to the well to hear it. Are we under attack? Have the mortals come again to besiege us? Akinabi spread his arms, his long sleeves hanging like the wings of a bat. "Silence for the Queen," he said. "Hear the mother of all." No one had been speaking above a whisper, but at the Lord of Song's words, the room grew silent in an instant. Utuku leaned forward, her eyes glittering in the slots of her mask. "I need you, my children." Her words were not spoken aloud, but flew straight into the minds of all those present, like a sudden thunderclap, a crash of overwhelming fury that for a long moment turned Vieki's own thoughts into shards, splinters, powder. "I am weak," the Queen told them, although the force of her thoughts brought tears of pain to Vieki's eyes. "My strength has been spent in the defense of our race. The sacred sleep from which I just awakened will be my last. There is no further help for me there." Many of the nobles around Vieki began to moan, whether in pain like his at the force of the Queen's words or in fear at what they signified. But Utuku did not pause. "Only with the aid of all your hearts and hands can I survive the present danger," she told them. "Can we all survive?" Several of the gathered nobles, overwhelmed by the force and terror of this message, now dropped to all fours and pressed their faces against the cavern floor like sacrificial beasts awaiting slaughter. Jijibo, the dreamer, laughed and did a gleeful little loose-jointed dance beside the Queen's black stone chair, as though he had never seen finer entertainment. Akinabi raised his arms and spread his gloved hands, and the observers quieted. "Our beloved Queen has fought so long and hard for us," the Lord of Song declared, "both here and in the lands beyond life, that she is weary, terribly weary. So she asks me to speak for her." He raised one arm higher and curled his fingers into a fist. "Heed your Queen. We are in peril. But before we can protect ourselves from the new dangers that threaten, we must put our house in order. There are those among us who took advantage of the Queen's Ketaindra, traitors who tried to use her long sleep for their own advantage." He paused, and his masked face looked out blankly over the crowd of nobles and soldiers. "Libertines, thieves, traitors, and now they will face justice." A pair of tall Queen's Teeth stepped forward and grabbed the first kneeling figure, dragged him to his feet, and then turned him around to face the crowd of nobles. His features, though battered and bruised, were all too familiar. It was Yemon, Viecki's secretary. The Magister's terror returned like a blast of icy wind. Every sense, every nerve urged him to flee, but his limbs would not respond. He could only stand and wait and watch. So it is to be death for me after all, he thought. Akinabi has found someone to inform against me. Farewell, my family. I hope the disgrace is not too great to be endured. Farewell, Nezeru, my daughter and heir. But in that moment, instead of his lawful wife, it was the face of his mortal lover, Soja, that came to him. He hoped she and their daughter would not be punished for his mistakes. One by one, the other prisoners kneeling before the queen were dragged to their feet, named, and then forced around to face the watching crowd. To Viecki's increasing confusion, almost none of them held any rank higher than Yemon. A few clerics, another magister's secretary, a sacrifice commander who had only recently been named a general. The most important of them was Nijika, a host singer Viecki remembered from the days of the Northmen's siege of the mountain. Like Yemon, she had new wounds on her face and head, and had obviously suffered since being seized, but she stood expressionless in the grip of the queen's teeth, while the watchers murmured and stared, and the lightless ones throbbed in the deep. After she had been named and displayed to the watching crowd, Nijika and all the other prisoners were forced back onto their knees again at the foot of the queen's great stone chair. In these terrible times, we face dangers both from within and without, Akinabi warned. While the people's beloved mother slept, these wretched creatures you see before you conspired to flout her will. They instigated laws and directives that went against our oldest traditions, weakening their own people and making a mockery of the very memory of our garden. Viecki was stunned by the Lord of Song's words. Surely no one gathered here could believe that this small coterie of minor officials had instigated the idea of giving half-mortal bastards the right to join important Hikidaya orders like sacrifice and song. It had taken the combined power of Marshal Muyare and Viecki's master Yaarike, as well as Akinabi himself and several more of the most powerful nobles, to create such sweeping changes. Had the great singer somehow managed to convince the queen of such an obvious untruth? Or was something else going on? The first prisoner, Yemon, was now dragged on his knees right to the queen's feet. He whimpered, but when he would have turned away in shame and terror from the queen's shiny, masked face, strong hands grabbed his head and held it so he could not move. Viecki expected Akinabi to read a list of charges against the prisoner, but instead the mother of the people reached down and touched Yemon's forehead with her white-gloved hand. The hapless secretary began to quiver, harder and harder, until it seemed some huge invisible predator shook him in his jaws. The guards abruptly let go as though they had found themselves holding something hot. Yemon began screeching, broken, wordless cries, even as the chant of the lightless grew louder and the air in the cavern grew warmer and thicker. Now a strange shadow slipped across the prisoner from the place where Utuku's hand touched him, rippling slowly outward, spreading down his head and over his body like spilled ink on a blotter. Yemon's shrieks subsided into little more than whistles of escaping air. Then he abruptly dissolved into a cascade of ash or black dust. Viecki barely restrained a cry of disgust and horror. While the crowd watched in rapt, uneasy silence, the next bound figure was dragged forward to the queen, and the scene was acted out once more, and then again with each of the accused traitors. By the time the last prisoner, host singer Nijika, was dragged to Utuku's throne, she had to kneel in the drifting remains of her predecessors. Nijika did not wait for death in silence, or whimper as Yemon had done. Instead, she proclaimed in a loud, clear voice that all the gathered nobles could hear, "Hikadayae! I do not know precisely what I have done, but if my queen and my master say I am guilty, then I am guilty, beyond question. Know only this as my last and truthful words. I love my queen more than my own life, more than the honor of my family, clan, or order. I swore when I became one of her singers that I would gladly surrender my life for her, and the manner of that surrender is of no import now. I die without regret, because it is my mother's wish." Light from the well played across Utuku's silver mask as the queen paused, and for a moment Vieki thought she had been touched by the singer's words and might pardon her. Then the queen reached forward, but instead of touching Nijika's face, she placed her fingers on the host singer's breast as if in blessing, and the singer threw her head back in some unknowable pain or ecstasy. The queen leaned farther forward. Her hand seemed to pass into Nijika's body. The prisoner cried out a moan of uttermost extremity like nothing Vieki had ever heard. Then the blackness swept over her like wildfire, and she crumbled into a mound of dark motes indistinguishable from those who had died before her. But as this ashy powder settled to the cavern floor, and the wisps of smoke dissipated, Vieki saw that the queen held something in her hand. It was Nijika's heart, still wet but blackened in places as though it had been pulled from a fire. "Here, Song Lord." Utuku's thoughts, though directed at Lord Akinabe, pierced Vieki like darts of ice. "Keep this with honor in your order house. Her circumstances may have made her a traitor, but the host singer's heart remained true." The Lord of Song accepted the burned thing from the queen, nodded in apparent gratitude, and then stepped back. "So ends the conspiracy," he announced. "So must it always come to those who betray our queen and people." Many of the audience in the chamber of the well now cheered and called out their thanks, praising the queen and Akinabe for preserving them from the traitors. But Vieki could not help noticing that Muyare, marshal of all sacrifices, leader of the queen's armies, was not one of those caught up in the moment. The great warrior stood with eyes downcast, his arms at his side, and Vieki realized that whatever was happening here, it was not yet over. "Hear me now as I speak for the queen," intoned Akinabe. "Hear now why you are all needed, why your strength and loyalty are our only defenses against destruction." He raised his arms again, waiting for the shocked murmurs of the onlookers to fade to stillness. "Yes, destruction. You all know of Ineluki, Storm King, who fought the mortals until they destroyed him, then returned from death to fight them once more before being destroyed forever in the War of Return. The same war that forced our queen into the healing sleep from which she has only now awakened." As Akinabe spoke, the queen looked upward past the well and the breathing harp, her masked face staring into the farthest heights of the chamber, where cold from above met the damp warmth from the mountain's depth, and flakes of snow had begun to swirl.
When Ineluki of the Zidaya was still a living king, Akhenabi continued, defending the great fortress of Aswa from the ravaging Northmen, he turned to our queen for help in his struggle against the mortals. She sent him the finest hearts of the Order of Song, 5 of our eldest, wisest, most skilled singers. These 5 lords of song, Karkaraji, Suteki, Omu, Enage, and Uloruzu, may they all be remembered as long as the garden itself, were afterward called the Red Hand. Adding their strength and knowledge to Ineluki's, they bent the walls of time and space and sung up ancient powers and dreadful spirits. But not even the Red Hand were powerful enough to defeat the swarming Northmen and their iron mortal weapons. In desperation, Ineluki sought for a weapon so devastating that it would scour the plague of mortals from the face of our land forever. But his summoning failed, and he was destroyed. The 5 Red Hand perished and died beside Ineluki. Azua fell to the mortal invaders. A cry of grief and loss went up from the crowd, as if the old and familiar story were being told for the first time. Even the lightless ones seemed to hear it with dismay, and their alien voices thrummed in counterpoint from the depths. Thus passed the last kingdom of our kind from these lands, said Akhenabi. The last, that is, but for our home, this mountain of Nakiga. Ineluki's Zidaya kinsmen scattered to the woods and other hiding holes. We Hikedaya sealed ourselves behind our great gates as the tide of mortal men swept across all we had known and loved. But Ineluki, though his earthly shell had died, was not truly gone. His anger was so strong that he lingered in the places between as a spirit of helpless rage, until our queen found him again. He bowed and made an elaborate gesture of gratitude towards silent Utuku. Most in the crowd imitated him. Yes, he went on, louder now, our queen risked her own precious life to search for him in those dark regions where life itself is the enemy. And when she found what remained of him, a small, deathless flame of rage, she brought him to sanctuary in the endless corridors of the breathing harp. Together our queen and Ineluki's Storm King summoned back the spirits of the Red Hand as well. We thwarted the true death for you. The queen's thoughts were ragged, but so powerful that many of those listening cried out to hear them. All for you. And now that death stalks me in turn. Some of the Hikedaya were slack-mouthed and moaning. And so we prepared to strike at the mortals once more, and the war of return continued, said Akhenabi. But again, treachery overcame us. This time those of our own race, Ineluki's own cowardly kinsmen, sided with the mortals. The turncoat house of Year Dancing led the remaining Zidaya against us, and less than half a great year ago we were defeated at the very gates of Aswa. Ineluki, the Storm King, that great heart, that sacrifice for his people, was delivered to unbeing and is forever lost to us. One of the bravest of all our kind, unmade. And when Ineluki and the Red Hand failed this time, our beloved queen was also nearly destroyed. Some of the gathered Hikedaya cried out in fury and shook their fists in the air, as if the treacherous Zedaya were here with them in the depths of Nakiga and could be punished. "Futility," cried Akinabi. "Ah, such a bitter taste. There is no poison to match it. But do not underestimate our queen, who loves and protects us always, because in the grim aftermath of that failure, as she wandered lost in the Ketayindra, great Utuku was still searching for a way to destroy our treacherous enemies. And she found one." The cries of anger ceased. The great chamber fell silent. Even the lightless seemed to pause and listen. Ineluki was gone, and most of his Red Hand, too, the Lord of Song continued. But one who had sacrificed all for us and for the queen still lived. And Utuku, the mother of all, found that fearless spirit in the lands where sleep and death meet. Although it was Akinabi who spoke, all eyes were now on the motionless queen. "Yes, for despite all the mortals could do," Akinabi declared, "Omu, the voiceless, one of the greatest of all our kind, had not entirely perished in the Storm King's destruction." "Try to imagine such devotion, Hikedaya," Akinabi cried. "Already murdered once by mortals, returned from death to fight again for our kind, and then murdered once more by those same cruel, mortal hands. And yet still Omu of the Red Hand would not die." Murmurs of horrified wonder rose from the crowd. "Full of secrets from the places between, still burning for the vengeance that has been denied us, Omu the Whisperer did not surrender. And even as I speak, she still clings to existence in the dreadful lands beyond life. And in this very hour, but only with your help, the queen will bring Omu back to us." Although he was as stunned by this as the rest, Vieki was also full of doubt. Even if the bizarre tale of Omu's survival was true, what could death have taught the undead singer that it had not already shown her the first time she died? How would bringing back one of the Red Hand change the Hikedaya's fortunes when the queen and Ineluki themselves had not managed it? And why had Vieki and the rest of Nakiga's elite been brought here to the Chamber of the Well? "We will prepare for her return," Akinabi announced. As he spoke, a squadron of Queen's Teeth appeared from one of the chamber's outer archways. 4 of them carried an open ceremonial litter with a young woman of the Hikedaya swaying inside it. She was dressed in a robe as rich as one of Utuku's own, an ornate masterpiece of patterned spin silk, and her jet hair was elaborately curled and pinned as if for a wedding. But despite her rich clothes and considerable beauty, Vieki did not recognize her. As the guards set the litter down by the edge of the well, her head wobbled. She did not seem to see anything around her, not the assembled nobles, not the breathing harp, not even the queen herself. "She has been given K-Visha," Vieki realized. "She walks in dream. But why? Who is she, and what is happening here?" "Bow your heads, Hikedaye," commanded Akinabi. "Lend your queen the strength of your hearts. And today the mother of the people will bring back one whom the mortals could not unmake for all their trying." His voice grew softer. Vieki thought the Lord of Song mimicked regret. "But that return is not without cost, and Amu's passage will not come without pain to us all. Praise loudly our loyal Marshal Muyare, High Magister of the Order of Sacrifice, who at our Queen's request gives Ya Jalamu, his own granddaughter, to be the opener of the way." "Praise Muyare!" someone shouted. "May the garden remember and bless him always." "Praise the Queen!" cried someone else. "Praise the mother of us all!" Vieki could feel everything the others felt, the fear and exhilaration of the Queen's struggle on their behalf, but some of his doubts remained. The girl might only be one of Muyare's several granddaughters, and part mortal at that. Vieki had heard her mother was a human slave like his own Soja, but it seemed hard to believe that the Marshal had surrendered her willingly to such a terrible fate, no matter how exalted the purpose. Muyare was a powerful man, with all the armed might of the Order of Sacrifice at his command. Only an order from the Queen herself could have made him do it. "Respect this noble gift of the High Magister," Akinabi proclaimed. "Revere Muyare's loyalty and his granddaughter's honorable sacrifice, which will open the door for Omu's return to us. The Queen declares that in Ya Jalamu's name, an entire new League of the Order of Sacrifice will be created, the League Seit Jalamu." A shout of approval and gratitude went up from the assembled nobles, but Muyare still gazed steadily at the ground before him, as if the sacrifice Akinabi was praising brought him only pain. He clearly could not bear to look at his granddaughter's face, though she would not have known him in her Kei-Visha dream. "Now our Queen needs your silence," Akinabi announced, and the chamber grew quiet. Even the throbbing of the air seemed to diminish. Only the lightless ones continued as they had been, their distant song droning and echoing beneath the great chamber. "She also needs your hearts and your thoughts," said the Lord of Song. "Only with the return of great Omu can our Queen resist those who would attack and destroy us. If our people are to survive, we must bring the Whisperer back from death to help our beloved Queen fight for our survival. It is time for the opening of the way." Now Vieki heard another note join the music of the lightless. Soft at first, but rising in pitch and volume until it wound through their croaking hymn like a single bright thread in a dark-hued tapestry. It was one of Akinabi's order of singers, kneeling beside Ya Jalamu's litter. More singers joined, and it sounded as if the icy mountain winds had all been given tongue, each syllable so sharp and cold that they seemed to pierce the bodies of all those listening and turn their inner organs to frost. Why perform such a ritual in front of us all? Vieki wondered. The Order of Song never display their powers this way. Why now? The answer came when he felt something touching his thoughts, a probing pressure that soon became an altogether more commanding intrusion. It was the Queen, he realized, taking control of his mind and the minds of his fellow nobles, weaving them into one thing, using their strength and her own together to pierce the veils that bounded life. The Magister resisted from pure reflex, but only for a moment. His strength was nothing against the Queen's. Within moments, he and the others were no longer individual Hikidaya,
but were being shaped into a single tool in Utuku's matchless grip. He could feel something of the queen's emotions, her fixed determination, and even her chilly satisfaction as she caught them all up and wove them together.
"Do not resist the mother of all,"
Akinabi declared, as if he had sensed Vieki's unwillingness.
"Now silence. Silence for the word of opening."
The song abruptly grew louder, more painful to the ear, the words harsh as hammer blows. Then, as if someone had thrown open a door to fierce winter, darkness swept over the chamber, and the cavern suddenly seemed to plunge into a terrible cold. But what Vieki could feel through Utuku's thoughts was 1,000 times worse. Beyond the cavern in which they stood, beyond their sacred mountain, beyond life itself, he could sense a lurking chill, so deep and so cold that nothing alive could approach it. Only Queen Utuku, armored in the song of Akinabi's minions and wielding the thoughts of her subjects like a weapon, dared to match herself against that ultimate, life-swallowing darkness. Vieki could feel his own heart beating so fast he thought it must burst from the terror of that ultimate shadow, but at the same instant it seemed to be happening impossibly far away. He felt like a single bubble among thousands in one of Nakiga's frothing hot lakes. Now Muyare's granddaughter began to writhe against her bonds, head back and mouth agape as though she were drowning. It was hard for Vieki to see through the deepening gloom. Even the ochre light of the well seemed to be shrinking, dying. But as the song gained strength, the young woman's movements atop the litter became more rapid and erratic, until her head was whipping violently from side to side. Marshal Muyare let out a loud groan and even seemed as if he might go to her, but one of his sacrificed generals put a hand on his shoulder. The marshal grew still again, face stolid, but Vieki could tell that beneath the stony pretense Muyare was as desperate as a trapped animal. The light of the well had faded until it seemed as dim as the glow of a distant dying star. Yajalamu's blind eyes turned helplessly toward the watchers, and her mouth opened in a shriek of pain that never broke free. Caught up in the song and helpless, Vieki thought he saw his own daughter, Nezeru, there, calling to him for help that he could not give. That is the other purpose of this, he realized in despair. Not just to bring back Omu, but so Akinabi can show us that only he has the queen's favor, that he alone now decides who lives and dies. Muyare's granddaughter, my child. No matter how powerful the noble or the clan, the Lord of Song wants it known that he can reach out to take whoever he chooses, and the queen will support him. Vieki looked to Utuku, who watched the girl's suffering without any sign of pity, and he felt something break inside him, something that had been there all his life, a belief, a trust. That could be my own daughter, was all he could think, over and over. It could be Nezeru. Yajalamu was thrashing harder now atop the litter. For a moment it seemed the force of her agonized struggle might break the heavy bonds that held her. Then her bones began to glow. First the skull bloomed behind the girl's face, a hot light that made her pale skin glow like the oiled parchment of a lantern. Next her grasping hands became things of fierce radiance, and smoke began to rise from garments, torn and disarranged by her struggles. Within moments her clothing curled and darkened, becoming smoke and ash even as it lay against her ivory skin, until the marshal's granddaughter was all but naked, legs and arms wreathed in flame, all her secrets exposed to the staring multitude. Then Yajalamu's flesh itself caught fire. It licked upward even from her mouth and nostrils and the corner of her eyes. Then all in an instant, her skin blazed into light. She threw her head back, and steam gushed from her sagging mouth. Shivers of burning red climbed out of her throat to splash flame in all directions over the litter. But the conveyance was made of ancient cured witchwood, and mere fire would not harm it. Only the girl burned. It was all Viecki could do to keep his knees locked, to remain upright. He felt as though he were ablaze too, but instead of his flesh, it was his thoughts, his certainties, that were burning away into ash. And that's where I'm going to stop for the night. I know we're in the middle of a scene, but it is top of the hour. And also, even before I started reading tonight, I started feeling a little flicker in my throat, a little scratch. So I'm hoping it isn't COVID. I hope it's not COVID, but we will see. But anyway, so I don't want to overdo the throat tonight. And there's a lot of in that section we just read, and probably a bit more before that section is finished. So since it is top of the hour and now a minute after, I'm going to close it off. But I thank you, as always, for joining me. There would be no point in reading or writing any of the stories that I read or write without people to listen to them, read them, listen to them. You know what I mean. You need readers to be a writer, or at least I do. Maybe some don't, but I definitely write for people to share with other readers because I'm a reader. Always was, always will be. So anyway, with that, I thank you for joining me. I ask you to take good care of yourselves and take care of those around you, your loved ones, but also just neighbors and strangers when possible. And yeah, that's about it for tonight. If this is just a scratch in the throat and nothing too serious, I will be back tomorrow later today at 7 p.m. And until that point, I say thank you so much for joining me. And I think I've said that already. Yeah? Okay, good. I'll say it again, but no, I already said it again. And that's that. So peace, 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 peace. And good cess to you all. And I will see you very soon. Okay, good night.